Now, we have talked an awful lot about energy thus far. It's a two-day event, so we'll get to other topics, but I'm very pleased to say we're going to broaden the conversation to the bigger topic under the sustainability umbrella. Of course, there are things that go beyond energy, although in some ways energy is the master resource, and how we deal with climate affects almost everything else. But I'm delighted to know that we're going to talk a little bit broader. Maybe I'll turn to you first, Tonilyn. How do you look at this question from your perch at the UN Global Compact?
So certainly the action to be taken is to be taken now. There are concrete areas where the Global Compact is requesting businesses to consider to act on. And these are the action areas where businesses are best positioned to drive progress on the SDGs. And these are action areas where businesses have the capacity to really proceed and to look at sustainability holistically.
So give us some
very
examples.
Concrete.
Yeah.
Climate action, setting science-based targets, and doing this in a very credible and accountable way. Credibility is based on scientific standards, and also accountability is when you report and become transparent in your progress. So that's what we offer in the Forward Faster. Second is to look at the just transition that is needed across that. So the transition is not enough. You have to also address the socio-economic impacts arising from the transition. What would be the jobs of the future? What would be the skills of the future needed if you are to do that transition? So businesses have the capacity to really invest on human capital to do all of those things. So that's just climate. There are other areas where where businesses can clearly close the gender pay gap, where businesses can clearly increase gender parity in terms of leadership positions in the management areas of the businesses. Living wage, Matt will be talking about that. How can businesses have to employ 2/3 of wage earners in the world, and you are able to give decent living conditions by giving living wages and not just minimum wage to these people. Then you can, really, make people's lives even more prosperous in that sense. And then also on water resilience, when we talk about climate, the triple planetary crisis, water resilience, biodiversity, water resilience is very important as an aspect of the business, and because businesses rely a lot on water as well. And the last one is finance. Private sector has the capacity to really put their finances and investments towards the SDGs, and that's where we would really call upon businesses. There are calls from the SDG Secretary General to put a 500 billion per year for the SDGs, but the capital asset market has trillions. So how do we, collectively, rally the private sector towards aligning their finances and investments towards the SDGs? That's one of the track areas where we are focusing on in the Forward Faster initiative of the Global Compact.
So thank you. That's a good overview. You gave 5 concrete areas. I'm glad we brought it down from the level of aspirations. But before we get to the level of perspiration, which we will in a moment with Matt on living wage, just on United Nations, your particular part of the UN, what do you see is the role that you have in liaising with business? Is it that of convening, or are you the bully pulpit, or are you a bully telling people what to do? How do you describe the value that you think you bring to this?
Thank you. We were founded by Kofi Annan, Secretary General at the time in 2000, because he wanted to put a human face to the global market. So he wanted an entity in the United Nations to link businesses to the United Nations, advocate with the United Nations, plan with the United Nations on what the future of the world should be. So this is the role of the Global Compact. We are certainly now the largest corporate sustainability initiative in the world, and our mandate continues to be to harness the collective global impact of businesses, rallying them towards the 10 principles of the Global Compact, encompassing human rights, labor rights, environmental protection, and good governance. And at the same time, delivering on the SDGs. This is what we urgently need at the moment. We are more than halfway through in our time span to meet the targets, but we are not nearly halfway there.
Okay, so I'll come back to you and ask you about maybe metrics of progress in a minute, but let's get Matt into this conversation. Matt, you're representing a leading law firm. Many in this room would know Linklaters, one with a global footprint. And you are here to talk about what your experience is with living wage. Can you briefly define? I think people all have a general sense of what a living wage is, but quite specifically, what do you mean when you talk about living wage, and what are you doing about it?
Thanks, Vijay. So, hi, everybody. So a living wage means that people can live a dignified life. A minimum wage is just about enough to get by, but even in the UK, there's 3 or 4 million people in work poverty who are receiving a minimum wage. The way we talk about it at our place is to say it's a difference of quality of life. It means you can take the tube to work rather than the bus to work, which means you might take half an hour off the journey at each end, gives you an hour more at home, an hour less work, if you like. So it's a quality of life, it's respect, it's dignity, it's the right thing to do. And for a firm like us, a very successful corporate law firm, we can't not pay everybody in our building directly or indirectly employed a living wage because it's the right thing to do. We can afford to do it. It's a few pound for us per hour. We're not like a supermarket or a social care industry or whatever it might be where there are thousands of people at that rate. We can afford to do it, and we know it makes a difference. And picking up Lord Adair's point just now on the just transition, who I might incidentally get to help my son with his GCSE chemistry exams in a few weeks. Right. If he does Saturday tutoring or not, but that'd be handy. The just transition, we need to give people who are at the other end of the sort of the income spectrum the agency to make change themselves. We talk about heat pumps and this, that, and the other. If people haven't got enough money for anything beyond the basics, they're not going to be in a position to change their position at all. And that's just in the UK, let alone globally. So there is a strong link, I think, if we talk about just transition. We need to give people the means to be able to buy their way, for want of a better expression, out of the situation they find themselves in rather than be done unto.
So that's a powerful experiment that you've been running. Well, not even experiment, in real life. You've committed to this. Obviously, it fits in with the SDGs in multiple areas, and among other things, talking about a just transition. Having a living wage obviously helps in that cause, as well as other aspects of the transition. What have you found has been the response from, let's say, your peer group, other competitive firms, maybe parts of the world where you operate in, where this is not a popular idea in the developing world, for example?
Well, absolutely, it's tricky. I mean, you could say it's fairly straightforward in the UK. We have looked, we supported the launch at the UN last September of a global living wage movement. And we also have supported a number of launches around the world, including and I'll take Hong Kong as a good example. We were the only business to attend the launch of the living wage in Hong Kong. It was seen as quite a contentious thing to do, primarily because over there, the difference between minimum wage and living wage is nearly double. So it's a lot of money compared to here and many other places. Why did we go there and stand up? We're a law firm that tends to keep its sort of head below the parapet. We went there because we believe in it. We believe that people like us, people in glass buildings, glass and steel buildings, should pay their people properly, anybody on their premises properly. We weren't there to talk about what the government should be doing, what healthcare should be doing, what other sectors should be doing. We were there to say anybody who's in a big glass building should be paying all of their people properly. And that goes back to this, what's the role of each of us as businesses and business leaders. You can only do what you can do. We weren't there to influence the government. We weren't there to influence any other sectors, but we were there to advocate and influence in our bit of the system those around us who could be paying. So our peer firms or our clients, certainly in the UK, the model's been interesting. The living wage kicked off with firms like us, the blue chip businesses, paying it. That now has expanded so that there's 14,000 organisations across the UK paying it of all sorts, absolutely all sorts, shapes, sizes.
But they tend to be what, professional services firms?
Not at all.
Or what,
not at all. Now, quite very wide-ranging now. There are some local authorities that have managed to work it. There are some social care providers that have managed to work it. Hotel chains. So it's not just, but it's always seems to be always the ones who can afford to do it. The blue chip firms who get it started. They've got the money. They've also got the leadership and the sort of the voice, which helps to knock down you start down your own supply chain. It spawns to others. So I think there is a real role here. SDGs are tough. They're quite attractive. Mm-hmm. We used them quite early on as a really nice way to present all the good stuff we were doing. But to actually drive some of it forward, we've picked the living wage as ours. And I think there is a role for business to champion it, and it cascades quite fast.
What's been the biggest challenge? Has it been from, again, the companies that are not as in a privileged position as you are with high profit markets in professional services and so on, where they have lots of retail workers, where for them it would be a huge part of their pay packet? Or is it more of a political pushback?
I think if you try and be sort of as apolitical as you can about it, it's less political. It's what we try to do in Hong Kong. We just pointed at people like us. There's a perception that it costs more, and it absolutely does cost more for some sectors.
I mean, in some countries, it's seen as a question of national competitiveness. That's partly why some developing countries don't support this.
But what's hard, I think, and again, I'll keep coming back to the UK because it's a familiar market to everybody here. What's hard is that in the UK, Lidl and Aldi, which are the cheapest supermarkets by some margin, pay a living wage. Informally, they don't pay, they're not accredited, but they pay a living wage. So they can do it with the prices that they charge. That means why can't others? And we've found that the extra cost is pretty quickly absorbed by the reputational benefit, by the reduction in churn of people, by the dignity, the respect, the everything else. And actually, what's interesting is the ripple across the whole organisation. People are proud that we do it. They don't want the person who gives them a cup of tea in the morning or stands at security or anything else to be running 3 jobs. We don't want that because we want them to be cheerful when they turn up. And that's the value. If somebody's coming in to spend 500 quid an hour plus with us, if they get a smile on the way and a cup of tea and a warm welcome by somebody who's been there 10 years because we're paying them properly, that's worth its weight.
You can find benefits also.
Yeah.
We have a question from the floor for you, Tonilyn. Can you tell us the difference between SDGs and the Global Compact? Because they're related concepts. They both seem kind of nice things to do. The UN's sort of involved, but maybe it's not so clear to everyone. And you're wearing sort of a colorful brooch that looks like the SDG, but it's not actually, if you look carefully. It's not, for those of you in the back. So tell us the difference between these two things.
This is a color wheel. You can get it also from our booth there by the coffee. But anyway, the SDGs are basically the global goals that we have all set as a people of the world on how we want the future to be. So for now, it is set up to 2030 and have identified the targets under that where businesses, governments, and all parts of society should act on. So these are goalposts, basically, the SDGs. And the Global Compact is the institution, or is the partnership, is the initiative of the UN to harness the collective action of business around the SDGs and around the 10 principles. The SDGs might end as a framework in 2030. We could go ahead with another set of framework, certainly also related to the goals that we have now. But then the Global Compact will continue to be there as long as private sector is driving sustainability, and as long as the private sector engages with the United Nations to plan ahead on what the future should be for the world.
So now, you had mentioned this has been going since the time of Kofi Annan. Could you point to any concrete evidence that you've made progress? What are some metrics and measurement that you can tell us you've actually made a difference?
Thank you very much. So one concrete one would be on the number of participants that we have. I mean, I think 3-4 years ago, we had about 5,000 business participants. And in the last 5 years, we have now grown to about 22,000 participants in our membership. So that means that a lot more businesses are really willing to take concrete actions on sustainability.
Well, you've only told me they're willing to turn up and get a pat on the back.
No.
You haven't shown me any evidence. Like, what have they actually done?
No, because joining the compact means if you want to stay there, you have to report on your progress in a very transparent way, in a very credible way.
I see.
So if you don't do that, you are delisted from the
So there are some requirements they have to take on that keep them honest.
But we are not just, acting as, drivers of, businesses to act on things. We also provide tools that are necessary. We co-create, with the businesses, participants that we have in our base. We do thought leadership around the issue areas that I have just mentioned earlier today. And so we also provide the pathways, basically, on how. If standards are not there, we cooperate at the international level with our partners within the UN and other international organizations, such as the Science Based Targets Initiative that you already know what was the call of business to have some clarity on how to advance. So this is what we do. And yes, we convene. This is, I think, the convening power of the United Nations is what, joining the Global Compact, attracts businesses. Because in that convening, they are able not only to engage with the UN, but like-minded businesses. So they can easily, benchmark themselves how they are faring compared to the other leaders in sustainability. And so this is why, it's attractive for businesses to join us and to continue engaging with the Global Compact.
Matt, what's from your perspective?
Yeah, I might add that the value of the UNGC to us is that the thousands of members now are pan-sector and obviously global. So as all of us, I suppose, look more and more up and down our value chain, trying to work out how we connect with those who supply stuff, how we sell things to clients, and we're part of an ecosystem that actually UNGC effectively represents, because the collaboration of all this and the fact that we're only going to solve these things by working together, it's much easier when I can look left and right and see pretty much everybody who matters to me in the same room. So I do think this idea of stronger together, but the bigger the network, the better place we are to sort of tackle these things together.
There's a question from the floor about specifically how you use contracts and some of the mechanics of how you do living wages. I imagine this varies country to country, or do you have a kind of a worked out approach now that you believe works?
Yeah, so for us, we're in a privileged position, but then hopefully sort of many of you are too. When we decided to pay living wage, we didn't wait for our contracts to end. We worked out how much more it would cost for the remainder of the contract, and simplistically wrote a check to those suppliers to say, right, cover it to the end. So you can do it beyond the contract. One of the things that's common in the UK now is for suppliers to deliver two quotes if they're accredited themselves. One is a non-living wage quote and one is a living wage quote. So you can make a conscious decision about which one you go for. But I would say, and this is a good thing and a bad thing, the gap is narrowing. And it's a good thing, not suppose, the gap is narrowing in the UK. So the price of doing the right thing is much lower. It is tougher in other places where the gap's wider, and that's where it becomes much more of a right thing to do sort of decision, because a lot of the payback comes a little bit down the line.
And do you find that it tends to be Western multinationals who may have a brand, for example, in societies like the UK, where there's a high awareness and willingness to pay, that are doing this, whereas you might find local competitors in developing countries that don't do this and may have an advantage in some way in the marketplace?
There's an aspect of that. I think if you're a global international, if you do it in a few places, it's quite hard not to justify trying to do it in other places, which is why I think people like us sort of kick things off elsewhere. You see, my argument against, you're implying that by paying less, you're more efficient and more profitable. What we've found is by paying the right amount, we've become much more resilient, a much more pleasant place to be, a much prouder place, organisation to work for, and actually is something that clients like. And I think looking down the line, greenwashing, social washing, whatever it may be, the living wage is a very clear way and a very accountable way. I can throw the numbers out into the room, a very obvious way. There aren't many numbers to do with the S. Living wage is a very straightforward one and an easy shorthand to show that people matter.
On that point about, you called it social washing, I like that. It's because I'm on the watch for greenwashing in my day job. How do you handle this? Because again, I'm sure many companies would love to associate themselves with you so that they can get a good marketing blurb, but you have to maintain the integrity of what you're doing.
Yes.
What mechanisms do you have? Have you ever chucked out a company for being a bad actor, or is there some feedback mechanism to reprimand those that don't actually adhere to what they're supposed to?
Certainly. Since our founding, we have actually delisted about 10,000 companies already.
Really?
So we're interested not in the
10,000.
numbers, growing numbers, but growing in terms of the committed companies that really want to report and not just using the Global Compact as
You said you don't do this, but you do this.
We should.
And I'm very happy to hear about this. It's, that's good.
We're
Good.
both an enabler and an accountability mechanism. So we have to play both roles.
The carrot and the stick.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Well, good. Well, I think, to be honest, that's something I learned today. I'm very delighted to know this, that at the UN, you don't just get pats on the back. You have to step up in order to get the credibility. I think we can all agree we learned a lot, and we thank you for both of your work that you're doing. Give them a nice round of applause, please.